Okay, good evening. Thank you everybody for coming. So first of all, thank you, Ari Greenwald, for hosting. And we asked for light refreshments, even though it wasn't advertised. This is a little heavier than light, but really appreciate the beautiful setup. And thank you to all the fathers who came. Needless to say, it's extremely powerful when you're able to learn with your son. For whatever type of son you may have. If you have a son who's doing well in yeshiva, and he's the kind of kid like most kids, you want to give nachas to their father and please their father. Just knowing that maybe once a week their father's going to sit down with them to learn. They don't need your help, I'm saying that. But just knowing that once a week you're going to sit down and say, read the Gemara for me, and they'll be able to have that opportunity to give you that nachas. It will cause them to learn better in yeshiva, to know it better, and they're going to look forward to that moment of learning with you. And then you also may have the type of son who needs that support, no matter how well the Rabbi is doing and trying to reach each Talmud. This kid, that extra review one-on-one with his father at home is the make it or break it for him. So, if you know the Gemara well, and you're not trying to figure it out, looking at an art scroll while you're learning with him, but you come a little more prepared, you're calmer, which is important when you're learning with the kid who's struggling. And you're not trying to convince him to know something that you're not sure about yourself. You know well, and you're able to give it over to him. So thanks for coming, and it's really nice to see that they take it seriously and that you prepare and be able to learn with your son. The goal for tonight is to learn from Hakones, where we're going to start in the top of the Amud. We'll have the Gemaras till about 5 lines from the bottom, which is approximately what most of our classes are going to learn since Yeshiva started 2 weeks ago. Up until Sukkot, we have just 2 days left to Rosh Hashanah, have 3 days in between, and 2 days after. We have starts getting broken up now. So this Amud of Gemara is approximately what most classes will learn. And tonight's shiur goes well, Mirz Hashem. And if the Olam is interested, then Mirz Hashem, right after Sukkot, in the beginning of Cheshvan, we could certainly do a shiur like this again and go through another Amud, so you could be ahead. The goal would be to be ahead of your son. So you know the Gemara that he's learning and that you're ahead of him. So that was the general Hakdama. So now let's get into the actual shiur itself. So before we start learning Perek Hakones, which is Perek Shishi above Kama, let's make a general Hakdama, which is what the teachers do in the classrooms, and the important information to know. Come in. So the general Hakdama is that this Perek that we're about to learn, Perek Hakones, finds itself in Seder Nezikin. Seder Nezikin has all the masechtas that deal with damage. Someone who causes damage to somebody else, and if you are responsible, if you're not going to be responsible. Within Seder Nezikin, the first Masechta is Masechta Bava Kama, which means the first one, and then goes Bava Metzia, and then goes Bava Basra. So really, Masechta Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra, they were really one big Masechta. Within Seder Nezikin, there was this Masechta called Maseches Nezikin, and it was a huge Masechta of 30 prakim, which is very, very large. And it got divided up into 3 sha'arim. Bava means a sha'ar, so it got divided up into Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra. Now, primarily, the 3 Bavas, for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, the 3 Bavas talk about 3 different types of, obligations, damages do you need to pay. Bava Kama, which we're learning tonight, talks about actually damaging. Your animal ate up somebody else's field, you lit a fire and it burnt down somebody's house, you dug a pit and somebody tripped in it. That's going to be like real damage. That's Bava Kama. Bava Metzia is primarily going to talk about if I found something that belongs to you, my responsibility of how well I need to take care of it and returning to you. If I was a shomer, if you asked me to watch something for you. So those type of relationships where I have something that's yours, that's in my possession, how well I need to take care of it, how responsible I am, how well I needed to guard it. I'm a shoyer if I borrowed something from you, if I'm a shoyel, if I'm a shoyer mechinam, if I'm a meitzes aveda. That's primarily what it talks about in Bava Metzia. And then Bava Basra talks about different types of relationships. It talks about mainly if you're neighbors, how you work things out of your neighbors, and hezek re'iyah. And it also talks about if you're shutfim, how you work things out of your shutif, and also if there's Yerusha, which is like shutfim because the children are, splitting up the Yerusha. So Bava Basra, for the most part, it talks about that. So it's actually very neatly split up. Bava Kama is straight up damage. Bava Metzia is I'm your shomer, I'm your shayel, I'm your maskir, all those things. And Bava Metzia and Bava Basra is shutfim and yarshim and neighbors. Although the most likely the way Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra were split up is simply 10, 10, and 10. There's exactly 10 prakim Bava Kama, 10 in Bava Metzia, 10 of Bava Basra, because the last parak of Bava Metzia, if it was really by topic, the last parak of Bava Metzia should have belonged in Bava Basra, should have been in Bava Basra. So, but primarily it still remains the truth. The Bava Kama is primarily this, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra. So we find ourselves in Maseches Bava Kama. So that's what we're learning tonight. So we're learning Seder Nezikin. Within Seder Nezikin, we're learning Maseches Nezikin, which the first part of it is Bava Kama. Within Bava Kama, we're learning Perek Hakones, which is Perek Shishi. So before we get to Perek Shishi, let's just rewind very little bit of what happens up until here before we get to Perek Shishi. So the pasuk, there's 4 different psukim that describe 4 different types of damages that you could cause, that your possessions could cause, or something that you did could cause to your friend. We're not talking about, I mean, Bava Kama talks about it, but we're not talking about tonight like a adam amazik. You know, if you punch somebody or you hurt somebody, we're talking about your possessions. It's called niski mamayne. Niski mamayne doesn't mean that you cause monetary damage. Niski mamayne means that your mom and your possessions caused the damage. So there's 4 psukim that primarily describe 4 different types of damages, and those 4 psukim, the first Mishnah of Bava Kama calls them avos nezikin. And their names of them, the way the Mishnah calls them, the Torah doesn't call them this. The Torah just describes the story. The name that the first Mishnah is called Arba Avos Nezikin, and the names are as follows: Shiur. Shiur literally just means an ox, so it doesn't describe the damage, but that's the name of this Av. It's called Shiur. The second one is called Bayer, which means a pit. The third one means Mave, which means to consume, and the fourth one is Hever, which means fire. So now let's break them up. What are the common types of damages that could happen, and under which Av Nezikin they fall under? So one of the types of damages referred to in the Gemara is called the damage of Keren. Keren is an animal that uses its horns to gore another person or to gore another animal. It's kavanasi lahazik. In other words, the animal is intentionally trying to just hurt somebody, which is unusual for an animal to do. But that's the Av Nezikin of Shiur means Keren, that the animal used its Keren. Now, technically, an animal that doesn't have a Keren could also do this Av Malacha, like a kick. It could intentionally shove you, and these things are very rare. But Shiur, the Av Nezikin of Shiur primarily refers to Keren, and obviously that itself, there's different Gemaras, and there's Machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and we're just giving like basic Hakdama. So that's Shiur. Bayer is what Kimashmai is what it means, that it's a pit. You dug a pit, or you put something that somebody tripped on, you left something in Rosh Hashanah, your barrel of wine, splattered, and you didn't clean it up, and you caused something, a michshel in Rosh Hashanah, or you physically dug a pit, you're going to be responsible, in certain cases you're responsible, that's Bayer. Mave means to consume. So the Mave, the way it's referred to in the Gemara, is the Av Malach of Shein V'Regel, which is very important for Perek Hakones. Shein V'Regel means literally teeth. It's animals eat, and that's a very normal thing. An animal's born with a nature to just want to eat, and if you're not going to contain your animal or put a muzzle in it or put it in a gate, it's just going to go around and eat and eat and eat and eat, and it doesn't differentiate between. It's an animal. It's not mafkin. It's not going to differentiate between your property and someone else's property. It will just eat. And regel means your feet, but over here means to walk. An animal also is not careful. He walks. So if there's a phone on the iPhone on the floor, I'll step right on it and smash the $600 phone, and I'll step on somebody's possessions, or I'll walk right through a tomato field and just crush all the tomatoes. And he's not careful. So that's what Shein V'Regel means. That goes under Mava, which means it's consuming the other person's property. And Hever means Eish. It's called Eish, which is literally lighting a fire. And in what cases are you responsible for lighting a fire? So up until Perek Hakones, Perek Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, and Hey of Maseches Bava Kama, which I want to tell you the names of those parakim. Just tell you the names. The first Perek, the name is Arba Avos Nezikin. The second Perek is called Ketzad HaRegel. The third Perek is more famous. It's Perek, some people learned in Yeshiva, Haminiach Esakad, which talks a lot about a buyer. And then the last 2 parakim, Dalet and Hey, one is called Shar Shanagach Dalet V'Hei, that's the name of the Perek, and the other one is called Shar Shanagach Esapara. Primarily, up until Daf and Hey, where we're holding tonight, up until Perek Shishi, Perek Hakones, Maseches Bava Kama has been discussing the Av Nezik of Shiur, which is Keren, animal goring another animal or another person, and it also spoke a lot about Bayer, primarily. Comes Perek Hakones, the Perek that we're starting here, the one that your 6th grade sons are learning in Ali Taira. Perek Hakones is going to be divided into half. The first half of Perek Hakones is mainly going to be speaking about the Mave, which is Shein V'Regel, animals that just go out and they eat up someone else's property or trample over somebody else's property. That's literally half the Perek. The Perek is about 7.5 blot. And the second part of the Perek talks about Eish, about lighting a fire, and it crossed over your gate, and what it consumed, and all the cases of when you're responsible and when you're not responsible. So that's the Hakdama of what we are going to be learning tonight. Just a few other brief Hakdamas, and then we'll get right into the Mishnah. A very important thing to know when it comes to when your animal is mazik, that there's two basic main terms that the Torah gives. One is tam and one is muad. And a tam is an animal that was not born with this nature to damage. And if it does it the first time and the second time and the third time, it's considered a shir tam. And the owner is still innocent because he is not yet meant to know that his animal has this nature and this tendency, and that he was meant to provide this extra precautions and extra shmira for it. So the first three times it's called a shar tam, and the owner gets warned, your animal did this once, twice, three times, and then it becomes the fourth time and on, it becomes a shar muad. And a muad means that it happens all the time, and this is its nature, and this is its tendency, and this is what it does. So there's muad and there's tam. That's just basic terms to know for Maseches Bava Kama. Other basic terms to know for the entire Maseches Bava Kama and Bava Metzia as well, very often, is the difference between a pshia and a ainis. Pshia means that you are negligent. Pshia means that you acted irresponsibly, you acted recklessly. So usually if you're a pesheya, you're going to be held responsible because you should have done a better job. And ainis literally means forced, but ainis doesn't mean necessarily you were forced to do it. It means an accident. It happened to you unwillingly. It's not something that you chose to do. And not either because you were negligent. This was like a pure accident or unexpected. So it's called an ainus. But the literal translation of ainus is forced, which the meaning of that is the connotation of being forced is that this was something that wasn't your choice. You did not expect this. It's against your will. You wish this would have not happened. But sorry, this happened. Specifically for Perek Hakones, just two more terms to know is that there's a term called shmira pchusa, which means a lesser shmira, and shmira mu'ula, which means a better shmira. So there's actually three levels of shmira. One level meaning no shmira at all. We could call it tonight if you want, ain't a shmira. There's no term for it. One level is that you didn't guard it well. So like your guarding wasn't a guarding. So that's like ain't a shmira. Then you have shmira b'chusa, which means a lesser shmira, but nevertheless it's a shmira. And the higher level of shmira would be called a shmira me'ula. That concludes all the Akdamas. To briefly recap the Akdamas, we spoke about that we're in Seder Nezikin, Maseches Bava Kama, Perek Hakones, the 4 Avos Nezikin, and we spoke about that Perek Hakones is mainly going to talk about Shem Beregel. After the beginning of the Masechta spoke about mainly about Karen and Bayer, and we know what a Muad is, what a Tam is, what a Pshia is, what a Ainis is, Shmir Kusa, Shmir Ma'ula, and now we're ready to dive into the Mishnah. And I want to go back to where I started tonight for those who just joined. Thank you all for coming, and feel free to interrupt. Let's make this a classroom. I mean, I'm happy to have a good, share and questions and answers, argument perhaps. And if somebody has an art scroll and I'm saying something wrong, correct me. It's we help to. But the idea is that you should all know the Gemara well. Be prepared. You're taking the time to do that, and it's my supposed to be able to want to be here with you tonight. And then you go back and you learn with your children. And again, tonight we'll Amir Tzishem cover all the Gemara that will be covered in your son's classes, Elul Tishrei, which is very, very few days, like 7 days left of learning, So the classes are almost here. They're going to get to the bottom of the page, basically most classes, and you're good to go till Sukkot. And if this goes well and everybody wants it, after Sukkot we can do the next one, and you'll be ahead of your children, Amir Tzishem. Okay, so this Mishnah is a very long Mishnah, and this Mishnah has 10 separate cases. So every single Mishnah has different parts to it. It always has the case. And it's very important to literally just understand the details of the case and to illustrate the case and to properly understand it, especially for children. Sometimes we assume that we know what they're talking about. The animal fell and went into another guy's garden and they don't even know what a garden means, or they can't understand how that actually transpired. So just knowing the mikra, just knowing the fal is important. Every Mishnah has a fal. Sukkah shigavay l'mayl mesmam is a fal. We have a sukkah that's 220 ams, is the mikra. Then every single Mishnah always has a din as well. So in this Mishnah, there's going to be 10 cases. There will be 10 dinim as well. The dinim will be, some will be chayiv, some will be pater, or how you're chayiv, but, very similar dinim, but each case is going to have its din. And then what's usually missing in the Mishnah, which the Gemara is going to spend a lot of time doing, each one of these cases, the Perek Hakones is going to spend time on one at a time, is the tam, the reason. Why is the person in this case chayiv? Why is the person in this case pater? And Rashi often, even before you get to the Gemara, will kick in and share the reason why this particular case is chayiv or pater, so you should understand what you're learning. And then what's also usually in every Mishnah, although it's not explicitly there, is who said this Mishnah? Who's the man the Amr of this Mishnah? So we know Stam Mishnah or Meir. The average Mishnah is, Stam. If Stam Mishnah means a Mishnah that's Stam has no name, it's a Meir. But sometimes it will say clearly in the Mishnah who it is, especially if there's a machlokes. So you have one case, but you have two dinim, because one person says this din, one person that says this din. Then you have two timim. We have the time for this man the Amr. Like, so let's say Sukkah Shigavay L'Mayel Mesramama Psula and Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. So right there you have one case, the Sukkah Shigavay L'Mayel Mesramama. And then you have two dinim. You have either Psula or Machshir. Tanakama is the one who said Psula. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who said Machshir. So you have different people who said it, different dinim, and then they each give their time in the Gemara and the Sukkah why one says Psula and one says Machshir. So this Mishnah, there's no timing inside this Mishnah. The Gemara is going to spend a lot of time doing that, but we're of course going to speak it out. And we say Oisred, then we're going to speak out the time. But there's going to be 10 distinct cases, and there'll be 10 timim. And then at the end of the Mishnah is going to, whenever the Mishnah paskin that you're chayiv to pay the nezek, the Mishnah is going to tell you how you calculate that, and that will be very important. And then later in the Masechta, later in this whole almost dedicated to understanding that part of the Mishnah as well. So we're ready to actually go inside. So a kohen is tzon l'dir, somebody who took his sheep and he brought it into a deer. So a deer is a farmer who has a very, very large field. He usually wants his animals to specifically congregate in certain areas of the field so they fertilize that area of the field. So what he does is he builds like this fence. It's not like this permanent house. It's not like this permanent barn. He builds this fence and he obviously makes it, he wants it to be animal proof, that the animals shouldn't be able to break through. And he keeps the animals, he makes them stay there for a night or a few nights, however it is. And then when he's done fertilizing that area of his massive field, he'll build a new deer. In English, then it's like this gated area, and he'll have the animals spend some time there. So this person, he makes a deer and he brings his sheep into the deer, and he does the right thing. He seals this pen, this deer, he seals it properly. Now, properly is a vague word. What does properly mean? The Gemara is going to talk about that. But he sealed it properly. So what's the v'yatza now? Nevertheless, even though he brought his animals into the deer and he sealed it properly, v'yatza v'yizika, somehow the animals broke the door of this pen open and they got out. And because they got out, they went to the neighbor's field and they ate and they damaged the neighbor's field by trampling over the food or eating up the food chain or egel. Pater, the owner is going to be pater. The Torah says that if you did a proper shmira, and this was an einus, this is something totally unexpected because you were nal b'fnei karai, you're going to be pater. Now the Mishnah says case number 2, loy nal b'fnei karai, if you did not properly close this deer and the animals were not properly locked in, and then they just flung the door open because you didn't do a good job, and then they went out and damaged their neighbor's property through eating it or trampling it through Shem V'Regel. So then Chayev, and in this case, the owner is going to be Chayev, because in this case, he's going to be a Pshia. He was negligent, he was reckless, he didn't close it properly. So the first case is an Einus, you're Pater. In the second case, you're a Pshia, you're going to be Chayev. Next case, Nifritza Balayla. What happens if the walls of this deer unexpectedly just fell down? Like one wall just fell apart, and the animals were able to go out. And this happened in the middle of the night. And Taisvis over here adds in that it only middle of the night. Well, it didn't be like we're going to see in a second that you're Pater, because in the middle of the night, there's no expectation for you to know even that your wall collapsed to go out and save your animals. It happened during the day, even if it was a pure walking down. Okay, you heard about it. Someone's going to alert you. Someone's going to text you. Your wall just came down. You have to come running over and actually contain your animals. But if it was Nifrit Sabalai, in the middle of the night, one of the walls collapsed. Aynus. Aisha Pertsua listim. Thieves came. They wanted to steal an animal or do something, so they broke open something in the wall and they just left an open hole. V'yatza v'zika. So the animal got out through this broken wall, whether the wall broke on its own or listim, robbers knocked it down. V'zika, the animals went on. They caused damage. Pater, you're going to be pater because over here it's a case of an einus, and even in the case of these robbers, they just broke open the wall. They didn't necessarily directly cause the damage. They indirectly caused the damage by them making a hole to go steal whatever they wanted to steal. Maybe some of the tools for the field. The animal was able to get out later. We're not going to hold them responsible. In Bezdin down here. Later in the Gemara it talks about chayiv b'dini pater b'dini adam, but chayiv b'dini shemaim. That's a later Gemara in Perek Hakones. So those were two more cases. If it was Nifrit Sabalayla, or if the listim broke through it, you're going to be pater. However, if when the listim went in there, they lifted up the animal or grabbed the animal by its reins or by its leash, and they intentionally took the animal and set it free, if the listim intentionally took the animals out and set it free and let it loose, so then listim chayavim, the listim, even though when you steal it doesn't belong to you, to a certain extent, you made a kinyan on this animal. Now this animal belongs to these listim, at least to the extent that they're responsible for anything that this animal now does. They'll have to return this animal because it doesn't belong to them, but the responsibility of the animal belongs to them. And if they you a listim chayavim, they're going to be responsible for anything that these animals now that were let loose and free go and cause damage. Now, here's an interesting case. So until now, we basically said you have to guard your thing properly. If it was an aynis, you're going to be pater. And if it was your pshia, you're going to be chayav. Now we're going to say a case where we're actually putting a responsibility on you to do an extra special type of shmirah, because that's what's expected of you in this particular case. And if you don't, you're considered like you're reckless. You're considered that you're irresponsible. You're going to be chayav. What's that case? If you put the animals in a boiling, baking hot sun, and the animals get really, really uncomfortable, and there's no shade in this deer, and you know that the animals, they just go crazy. They're going to climb up the walls. They're going to slam their bodies into the walls or into the door. They're going to try to chew up the lock, whatever they're going to do. They're going to do anything to try to escape, to find shade for themselves. So in that case, when you were irresponsible because you left them out in the sun, even if you did a proper shmirah, but you did the regular nal b'fanal karai, but if you put them in the chama oy, or if shemasara lecheirish shaita v'katan, you handed over an animal to a cheirish, to somebody who's deaf mute, which is considered someone who has no das, or a shaita is a deranged person, or a katan is a minor, so he's irresponsible. So in these cases where you put it in the sun, or you gave it to cheirish shaita v'katan, b'yatza v'zika, and then the animal went out and it caused damage to your friend's field, chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. In the case of cheirish shaita v'katan, you're irresponsible for handing it to them. They're not b'nei das. And in the case of inicha v'chama, you know that the animal is going to break out if you leave them there. So just having the regular locks is not good enough. You have to either do a shmir ma'ula or don't put them don't leave them in that situation. However, what's if you're trying to be responsible? You don't bring them into a deer. You don't lock them up with this type of shmir or that type of shmir. Instead, you check them in with a babysitter and you give them to a raya, somebody who's a professional pastach. He's a professional shepherd, and he takes care of your sheep. So masrul raya, if you gave over your animals to a raya, so now you absolutely you did your due diligence. You did what's responsible. You couldn't take care of your animal. You handed over. You hired a raya. That's good. And now something went wrong over there. Nichnas raya tachtav. The raya takes the place of the owner. So in other words, the raya assumes responsibility. And if they went out and damaged, it will depend. If it's a case where the raya was a pshia, he'll be chayiv. If it was a ayinus, he'll be pater. But the raya now takes the place of the original owner, and all the regular dinim that apply to the owner are now going to apply to the raya. So masrul raya nichnas raya takta. Now we have an interesting case. We have an animal that's either naflo legino. The case is that it fell. Okay, it fell. How did it fall? The Gemara will talk about it later. Either its friend pushed it, or it slipped, it tripped. There's different ways how it could fall, but it was an accident, and the animal fell into the gina of your friend. Now, how do you illustrate this case? So Rashi says two ways. Either you're talking about like an elevated Rishus Rabim, and the properties that are off the Rishus Rabim are lower. So the animal's walking on Rishus Rabim and just tripped and it fell over, down the cliff into the friend's garden, which is below. Or you have some area on your roof where you were having your animals, and your animal fell off your roof into your neighbor's backyard. So there's two ways that could happen. So naflo legina, which is a case of an aynis, the animal tripped, fell, got pushed, it fell into the garden of your friend. Vinanis, and your animal had anah. It had anah because once it was there, it started eating. Or another way that it could have anah is because the wheat that was there or whatever was growing there cushioned the fall. So instead of the animal breaking all its bones, it actually smashed all the tomatoes that were there, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet or more, and it caused damage. But those tomatoes caused the animal to have a smooth landing, a softer landing. So it had anah. It caused damage, but because of the damage, it gave pleasure to the animal, either by cushioning his fall or by once he was there, he started eating. So nafal legina v'nenis. So here's the interesting din. The din is mishalemes mashenenis. The owner only has to pay, and it's a cheaper rate. The owner only has to pay mashenenis, the pleasure that the animal had. So basically, what the Mishnah is really saying is, because it was an aynis, you're pater. You don't have to pay the damage. You don't pay the damage. You're pater, but you do have to pay the pleasure. So a good example for that would be, if let's say I own an animal and it's lunchtime, and usually I have to feed my animal lunch. And to feed my animal lunch, I go to the pantry and I take out the animal food that you bought in Home Depot or in Petco. And you take out the animal food, and it costs about $1 to feed this animal lunch. You take out the bag, you put some in a bowl, you feed your animal. Lunch costs you $1 a day to feed your animal. Now, this particular animal, because it was lunchtime and it was nafla lagina, fell off your roof or fell off your chutzarabim into your friend's field. So he went and now he ate up, $30 worth of asparagus, expensive vegetables, and it ate at lunch and it cost $30. So if I would be responsible to pay the damage, then that's $30. That's how much damage. It ate up that much worth. But you're not responsible to pay the damage because this case is nafla lagina, it's an oinus. You're actually potter from paying the damage. But the Mishnah says you have at least paid the hana that you had. Your animal just got a free meal. You would have had to pay to feed your animal, and it usually costs you $1 a day. So that dollar that you saved, don't keep it. You're going to pay it now to this guy who just suffered the damage. So on one hand, the Mishnah comes across like in the case of nafla, you're chayiv. It's really more that you're potter. It's really an oinus. Nafla lagina, you're potter. You're not going to pay masha hizika. You're not going to pay the damage, but you will pay the pleasure that you had. Or in the case where if the animal fell and it because all the produce that was there cushioned the fall. So how do you estimate it then? So you go to a person and you say, if your animal would fall off a roof, how much would you be willing to spend to pay someone to put a cushion over there to cushion the fall? And however much that price is, that's the value of what these vegetables, put forth. So the vegetables themselves could cost much more money, but this person's only going to pay the benefit that he had from it, whether it's the free meal or the cushion. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know if that happens. In general, it's viewed as a kula. Mashanenis is always going to come. I doubt you'll have to pay more, like pay mashi zika, if that would technically be the case. But usually, it comes out to be that the owner is getting away much cheaper. So nafla lagina, if it fell into gina, yeah.
We need to introduce a new case, and we couldn't just say it in the first case.
Oh, well.
No, not for like.
Yeah.
Since he's potter, but if nenis is nenis. Your potter oinus, it's the same case. It's the same case. The animal went out, created a hezek, but it was oinus, and the idea is that your potter. So the share is, but then actually you get a free.
Right.
What was the need?
Why by other kedak is different? No, it's not just introduced. We actually didn't even say it over there. Over there, we don't say mashal, we say potter.
Saying we could have said this did in the same case.
No,
added it to
I think your question is even stronger. At first, I don't have the answer to your question. Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the question is even stronger. In other words, it's not just why don't we say this din there. We actually don't say the din there. Over there, we say potter. All the dinim until we say potter. Only in this case of nafla do we say the mashanenis.
Not necessarily that it's locked in a pen on this.
It's not. It was So it could be over here. It's a greater oinus, which could be the answer. Is what I'm thinking. What you're saying is that because in this case it's a much greater oinus, would give you less chayav, not more chayav.
Here the fact is the owner's probably with him, right? If somebody's responsible, then there was an accident that he fell out.
No, not necessarily the owner's with him. Imagine you have gates on your roof and you have an animal there and you let your animal stroll.
First case,
Then it fell. It could happen now. Someone has, people have dogs in the city and they think everything's fine. Their dog fell off the porch into someone else's garden. And it caused damage. It was a pure oinus. So Torah's way is that you're potter when it's an oinus. But in this case of nafla, you have to pay at least mashanenis.
The case that's little new twist is the idea that nafla, the cushioning is a new concept. That the animal went and ate and had enough. He could have said that already in the beginning. But if you had enough, you should know.
Wasn't necessarily locked up in the pen.
It wasn't. Enough could be from Rosh Hashanah.
Different case. It wasn't locked up.
Point is the animal does damage, but it's wasn't your fault. Idea is your potter. However, free lunch, your animal got lunch.
The Gemara later does talk about the difference in if it applies to the cushioning and what after it got up, it started having a field day and started eating the whole field. Yeah. And then also the next case, which is the same story, but it didn't fall, it just intentionally climbed down, which is the next case we're about to learn. Also, the Gemara talks about it, how many hours was it there for? When did the owner find out that it was there? When did it become responsible? What's if the animal ran back to that field? You know that this animal likes going there. All these cases are going to cover the Gemara. But your initial question is a really good one, even though I learned this so many times.
Maybe that's the answer. It's an introduction to the following cases, which a little bit needs what they call it, this world of segue. It was a segue to introduce these other.
Okay, maybe I'm going to look into it for sure because thank you for that question. Okay, so nafla legina, we said vinanis, mishlamis mashanenis. However, the next case is that, and this is case number 10 in our Mishnah. Yardu kedarka, if it the regular way, it just went down. In other words, you have your animal Rishus Rabim, it sees a field down below, it doesn't trip, doesn't fall, doesn't get pushed, and you're not careful with watching your animal. In other words, you're a pshia, and your animal climbs down because animals know how to do that. And it goes down and it goes to eat your friend's field. So in that case, you're a pesheya. So if you're the kedarka vizika, in that case, you're going to pay mishlemis mashizika. You're going to pay the full damage. You're not going to get away with being potter and only paying mashanenis. You're going to pay the full price of masha hizika. So up until here, we have 10 cases in the Mishnah. We have 10 clear dinim. And we pretty much said why. Usually the why is your pshia or ninus. That's usually the why. And in the case of enicha b'chama, even though it was guarded, it was expected of you to do a shmir mu'ula. So we explained that. Now there's going to be a very interesting din. The Torah is actually pretty lenient and pretty nice to the mazik. When it comes to paying for damage, how do you calculate it? So before we learn the Mishnah, I want to present that there's like 3 ways to look at it. One way is your animal went down and let's say it ate up, a bunch of tomatoes. So pay for the tomatoes. How much do tomatoes sell for? This owner was going to take these tomatoes and go to the marketplace tomorrow and sell them. How much are the tomatoes worth? So you could look at the tomato. Another way is you don't look at the tomatoes at all. You look at the field. How much is this field worth? And with tomatoes, and now that this piece of field is missing the tomatoes, how much is this piece of field? So you're not looking at the price of the product. You're looking at the field. So you're looking at it. You're viewing it as the field got damaged, not that the tomatoes got damaged. So this piece of field, what was it worth with tomatoes? What's it worth with damaged tomatoes? And then another way to look at it is, do I look only at this little piece of field? Let's say the animal ate up 2 by 2. Do I look at that 2 by 2? What does it cost with and without? Or do I look at the whole field? Do I look at the whole field and say, this whole field, what was it worth yesterday before the damage? And now from this whole field, a little part of it is missing. What did it go down in price? Now those 3 ways that I look at it goes expensive, cheaper, and cheaper. If you're going to look at the actual product, it's going to be very costly, more costly. If you're going to look at just this little piece of field, what it's worth with and without, it'll be less than what you pay for the tomatoes in the marketplace, because you're primarily buying a piece of land. With tomatoes, without, will be a difference. And if I look at the whole field, and this is just a corner of the field, it'll be even less. And there's a Xeris Akasav that the Torah teaches us from a pasuk. It says, again, this is the Gemara, so we'll save it from when we get up to there in the Gemara, where we learn it out from the pasuk. But Rashi already brings it down here. The Xeris Akasav that we look at the field price, not at the price of the product. And in the field price itself, we look at the field price that's the size of a Beisa'ah, which is 50 by 50 amma. So we don't look at a massive field where it's going to be irrelevant. And we don't look at just this little tiny piece where it's going to be too expensive. We look at a field. Had this been part of a field 50 by 50? How much would that 50 by 50 field go for yesterday before the damage? And how much is this field going to go for today? And it ends up being a very little bit amount of money. It ends up being a very little bit amount of money. For example, imagine anyone here was to go buy a house in Crown Heights, and the house is at least $1.5 million. And on the morning of the closing, your real estate agent takes you for the final walkthrough. And when you go through the walkthrough, you see that the bathroom window is broken. And it wasn't broken when you signed contract, right? You're going to come to the closing table. You're buying a house for $1.5 million. You're going to say, I want $800 off, $500 to buy the window and $300 to install it. They'll laugh at you. They're not going to give you $800 off the purchase price. Because it's a tiny window in $1.5 million house, they might not give you anything, because that's maybe too extreme. But if, let's say, you were going to buy a condo for like $500,000 and the front door was broken, and let's say it cost $1,000, they might not laugh at you, but they're not going to give you the whole $1,000. They'll say, okay, here's $300 off the price. Okay, that fee we're waiving, or they'll take care of you. They'll give you a little bit. That's what Rashi described, that process. Then on one hand, we're not going to get the guy away free. He's going to have to pay Mashahizika. On the other hand, Mashahizika is, we look at the field price, not at the product. And within the field itself, we look at a normal size piece of land, not a smaller piece of land. It ends up being what Rashi describes like a davar muat. In other words, from these 3 ways of paying, it's the one that comes out to be the least. So let's see that inside the Mishnah. Kates and the Shlamis Mashahizika. How do you pay damage? Now this applies to any of the cases that you're supposed to pay damage. What does damage look like? So the Mishnah says, Shamin base sa'ah ba'isa sada. We estimate a base sa'ah, which is 50 amma by 50 amma in that field. Kama hoysa yafa. How much it was worth yesterday when it had, tomatoes that were almost ripe or maybe fully ripe or whatever the case was. Vikama yafa. How much is it worth right now with that little bit that's missing? And that discrepancy, that difference, is the price that you're going to pay. Now we have one machlokes in this Mishnah. And that's on this halacha about how you pay. So Reb Shimon argues over here with the Tanna Kama, And Reb Shimon, I'll say what he says first, we'll do it inside after. Reb Shimon argues and he says, if it's a case where the fruit were fully ripe, the next morning the guy was literally going to come and cut the fruit off and go sell it. They're fully ripe. These fruit don't need the field anymore. They're fully grown. It's technically still attached to the field because I'm the owner and I didn't get to cutting it, but they're fully grown, they're fully ripe. And tomorrow maybe it was going to be the day that I'm going to cut them and sell them. So as Rabbi Shimon says, if it's Perek Gemurim, you pay the price of the product because that's the damage to the guy. These tomatoes were about to go on the shelves of the store. You're going to pay whatever the guy could have sold it for. I don't look at the field price. Tanakama says you look at the field price always. If it's attached to the field, you don't look at the product, you look at the field. Rabbi Shimon says if it's Perek Gemurim, then you look at the pears. But he agrees to the Tanakama that if it was only 90% ripe and it still needed, or 95% ripe, and it still needed the field, then you look at the field. But if it's completely ripe, you look at the pears itself. So Rabbi Shimon says, Achla Perek Gemurim, if the animal ate completely fully ripe fruit, Mishalem as Perek Gemurim. In that case, you pay Perek Gemurim im sa'ah. If it ate a sa'ah, you pay the price of a sa'ah of that particular product. So sayim, it ate 2 sa'ah worth, which is a measurement. So sayim, you're going to pay 2. You're going to pay two sayim. So I wasn't sure how long this Mishnah would go, so we're already about 40 minutes into our shir. So I'm going to skip Rashis on the Mishnah, although the boys should know the Rashis, and they do learn them. And there's very simple, easy Rashis, really speaking out everything that we said in the shir. We'll skip it for tonight, because I do want to try to get to the bottom of the page in the Gemara, because that's the Gemara that in learning in class. But Rashis are important, so I just want to put that in there. So now, if you remember, our Mishnah said that you have to guard it properly. But what does properly mean? We don't know what properly means. So right over here, we have a brisa that explains this Mishnah what properly means. Zak the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, the Chachamim taught in a brisa, Eza hu kirai v'Eza shalai kirai. What does it mean that you did a proper shmira, and what does a non-proper shmira mean? So the brisa says, if you have a door that could withstand a normal wind, a regular wind, that's average wind that happens on an average day, that's considered a proper shmira. But if it can't withstand a normal wind, in other words, it's such a weak door that even a regular wind that happens on every Monday, Tuesday, that wind will knock down this door, that's considered like karai. So in this brisa, we actually have a very big chiddush. Because when you read in the Mishnah that you have to close the karai properly, you may think you have to do top-notch security. Maybe you have to put a door that's even hurricane-proof, that could withstand even unusual winds, that could withstand even an unusual event. That's not the case. This brisa clearly says that karai means you put a door that could withstand average winds. You did that, you did the shmira that the Torah requires you. Comes a hurricane, comes something very unusual, and this door is not the strongest door in the world, and it gets knocked down, you're not responsible because you were karai. And the brisa says, Einai karai is only if you put a really weak door, a door that can't even withstand. So in our Akdama, we spoke about the idea of shmira mu'ula or shmira pchusa. We see clearly from this Mishnah and from this brisa that only a shmira pchusa, which a lesser type of shmira, is required. If you do einai shmira, you don't guard it at all. That's called leikarai yirchayev. But if you do a shmira pchusa, even a lesser shmira, it's an average shmira, you're going to be pater. Obviously, you do a shmira mu'ula, you're going to be pater, but it's not required of you to do a shmira mu'ula. So that's no, karai means even pchusa.
I'm saying, sorry, is karai pchusa means even less?
No, but this is what this price is teaching us, that when the Mishnah said karai, it means pchusa, it means a shmir pchusa. And that's a shmir pchusa. And if it's einai chaylam meruch mitzuya, that's nothing. That's barely a door. That's considered einai karai. So now, Ramani Bar Patish, so very often the Gemara, besides first figuring out the tam of all the dinim in the Mishnah, which this Gemara is going to do in Hakones case by case, it's going to go through. But very often the Gemara tries to figure out who the author of the Mishnah is. Now, Stam Mishnah is Rameir, but sometimes the Gemara will say, well, our Mishnah can't be like Rabbi, our Mishnah can't be like him, it must be like him. The Gemara spends sometimes a whole block figuring out who the author of this Mishnah is. So here, Ramani Bar Patish is going to want to suggest who the author of our Mishnah is. So it says, Ramani Bar Patish. Ramani Bar Patish says, Man Tana, who is the Tana of our Mishnah? I'm going to explain it after I read it inside. That by Muad, in the case of a Muad, the Sagili b'Shmir Pchusa, that a Shmir Pchusa is sufficient, Rabbi Yehuda, it must be Rabbi Yehuda. So we could pause here and we'll go back inside and we'll conclude what he's saying. So we spoke in the beginning of the shir that there's something called a Muad and a Tam. A Tam is if it's unusual for the animal to do this, then after 3 times, it becomes a Muad. But there are certain things that are muad. An animal is born, it's muad mitchilasa is called. It's normal for an animal to do shein v'regel, to eat and to just walk over other things. Every animal is born, you know that your animal is the type to go eat your neighbor's field and walk over things. For your animal to use its keren and go intentionally hurt someone or do some other type of kavanasi lahazik, that's unusual. An animal has to do that 3 times, and you only have chatzi nezek, then only on the 4th time it becomes a muad. So our Mishnah is talking about shein v'regel, because that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Our Mishnah is talking about sign, which are sheep. They don't even have keren. They don't even have keren. These sign go and they go on and they eat the other guy's field, right? Mashanenes, mashizika. They go and they eat up the other person's field. And so our Mishnah is talking about muad, because we're talking about shein v'regel. Every animal is born as a muad for shein v'regel. So even though it's a muad, which is, you would think more stricter because it's a muad, you know your animal is going to do this. Our Mishnah nevertheless said that a shmir b'chusa is sufficient. So this is Ramani Rapatish's question. Who's the Tana that holds that even though it's a muad, a shmir b'chusa is going to be sufficient? And he's going to bring a Mishnah that's going to talk about not shein v'regel. We spoke about the Arba Avos Nezikin. He's going to bring now a Mishnah from earlier in Bava Kama, where it's talking about the Av Nezek of Shiur, which is Keren. And over there's a 3-way machlokes. There's a 3-way machlokes of when if your animal is a muad, there's a 3-way machlokes of what level of shmira you need to give it. One opinion over there holds shmira b'chusa is enough. One opinion over there holds you need to give a shmira ma'ula. And one opinion holds there's no shmira in the world that you could provide. If your animal became a shur nagach, you're always going to be responsible. You don't want to take responsibility, kill your animal. Ainly shmira ela b'sak, and you have to kill it. You're keeping this animal alive. You know this animal now goes around and gores people. You could put the best chains in the world, the best doors in the world. You're always going to, if it gets out and damages, you're at fault. One opinion says, no, you have to do a shmir mu'ula. You did a shmir mu'ula, you're considered, you did your thing, you're going to be pater. And one opinion says, even shmir b'chusa. So we're going to copy the muad of Keren to the muad of shein v'regel over here. So Ramani Patrish says, who's the Tana in our Mishnah that holds that by muad, even though it's a muad, shmir b'chusa is sufficient? It's going to be Rabbi Yehoshua, because he's the one in that Mishnah over there that held that the shmir b'chusa was enough. And Rameir actually is the one who says you need to have a shmir mu'ula. And our Mishnah can't be Rameir, because Rameir would require you not just to do v'nal b'fnei karei, which means shmir b'chusa, he would have to do v'nal b'fnei shmir mu'ula in order to be pater. So our Mishnah can't be Rameir. And our Mishnah certainly can be Rabbi Eliezer, who's the 3rd opinion in that Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer holds that there's no shmir in the world. You're always responsible unless you're going to want to kill your animal. So Raman Rapatish is going to say, it seems obvious to say that our Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Yehuda, because he's the one by Keren that says Shmir B'chusa is sufficient when the animal becomes a muad. So over here we're talking about muad. Every animal is muad mitchilasai for shein v'regel. So our Mishnah is for sure going to be Rabbi Yehuda. Now, even though the Gemara doesn't present it in the way of a question, it's a little bit uncomfortable for the Gemara. We'd rather that our Mishnah not be Rabbi Yehuda, because Stam Mishnah is usually Rameir. So if we're forced, we say, this Mishnah is not Rameir, it's Rabbi Yehuda, we're stuck. It's not the end of the world. You'll find in the Gemara that happens, that the author of the Mishnah is not Rameir, it doesn't work out. But if we could make it be compatible with Rameir's opinion, that's much more Geshmak, and then the Gemara is going to say that next. The Gemara is going to say, no, really, I can show you that even Rameir is compatible with this Mishnah. So we're gonna get to that. But let's first see the Mishnah inside. Now, that Mishnah is also going to talk about Shur Tam. That Mishnah, we're going to read now the 3 opinions of what type of shmira you have to provide. We'll also talk about Shur Tam, but we're going to skip those details. We're not going to get into it. There's a whole separate Gemara somewhere in Bava Kama where they learn out from the Psukim about a Shur Tam. Some, in a certain way, Shur Tam stricter than Muad, even though it seems counterintuitive. But we're not going to get into that. It's not going to get to understand the Pshat on this Gemara. So we'll go back inside. Ramani Bapati says, Man Tana, who's the Tana of our Mishnah that holds that by a muad, in the case of a muad, which our Mishnah is clearly talking about, the sagile, that it's sufficient in a case of a muad b'shmir b'chusa with providing just the lesser type of shmira, Rabbi Yehuda, it must be Rabbi Yehuda. It's not, because we learned in another Mishnah here in Maseches Bava Kama about the avneseg of Shiur of Keren, an animal that uses its horn to damage, that kashrei ba'olav b'meseira. If the owners took the reins of the animal and tied him up with his horns to a wall or to a gate, or if he just put him in a proper enclosement, in a deer or something, in a barn, and he properly locked the door, so that's a shmira pchusa, and it went out and it caused damage, whether it's a tam, whether it's a muad, you're going to be chayiv dibri of Meir. So you see over here, a mayor holds that if you did a shmir b'chusa, you tied up the horns, you tied up the animal with its horns, or you did v'nal b'fnei karai, This is exactly the wording of our Mishnah. And V'yatzav Hizik, he says you're going to be chayiv in that case. So Rameir is not compatible with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, the next opinion that Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Emer Tam, in the case of Tam, you're going to be chayiv, which is interesting. And again, he learns it out of Psukim, and it's not for here. However, in the case of Muad, if you did the Shmir Pchusa, you're going to be pater. You're going to be pater. And he even has a pasuk, and this pasuk is brought down in that Mishnah. He has a pasuk where Rabbi Yehuda derives his opinion from that you're going to be pater by a Muad, you provided a Shmir Pchusa. Why? Shenemar, it says in the pasuk that below Yishmerenu ba'alav, and your owners didn't watch it, you're going to be chayiv. That's how the pasuk concludes. So below Yishmerenu ba'alav, if the owners didn't watch it, you're going to be chayiv. But b'shamar is that in this case you did watch it, you did a shmira, right? Below Yishmerenu ba'alav is the lowest level. So if you do no shmira at all, you're chayiv. What does that imply? What's the implication of that? If you provided a shmira, doesn't have to be the best shmira, but if you provided a shmira, you're going to be pater. So Rabbi Yehuda says clearly by the Shur HaMuad, the pasuk said that you're going to be chayiv when it's below. But if you did shmirah, like in this case, you were kasher b'alav b'meseira, or you did nal b'fnakara, you're going to be pater. So if you holds you provided shmir pchusa, you're not violating v'lo yishmerenu ba'alav, you're going to be pater. And this matches well with our Mishnah. The shmir pchusa is sufficient. And then Rabbi Eliezer has the most extreme or strict opinion. And Rabbi Eliezer Aimer, English shmir elisakin, which elasakin means the only proper shmir you could provide is if you kill the animal, shecht it, and eat it. And as long as you don't, you're 100% responsible. And even if you do a shmira ma'ula and you put a hurricane-proof door around it, if it gets out, you're going to be responsible. So those are the three opinions. And like Rashi here explains, there are mayor holds you need a shmira ma'ula, and Rabbi Yehuda says you need a shmira pchusa, and Rabbi Eliezer says you need to kill it in order for it to work. So from these three opinions, our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Eliezer, our Mishnah must be, like Raman Repatich says, it must be Rabbi Yehuda who holds that even by Muad, Shmir Pchusa is enough. And if you provide a Shmir Pchusa and it nevertheless somehow went out and damage, you're going to be pater. Zakti Gemara, if you want.
Maybe you said this before.
Yeah.
But why is it so obvious in the Mishnah that the Mishnah is talking about a Shermon?
No, that Mishnah?
This is our Mishnah.
Nope. Our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is talking about Shein V'Regel. And Shein V'Regel is considered Muad Mitchilase. Every animal is born with a tendency to eat and just walk over stuff. So when you have an animal that's born, you don't be like, oh, I didn't know my animal eats, warn me 3 times. No, that's what animals do. It's called Muad Mitchilase. Only Keren is the whole concept of common Muad, only applies by Keren. Now, Keren is a term, it means a horn, it usually means horn, but it's any type of weird behavior that animal develops, where it's damaging, biting, all these things, all under that Avnezek. It's Kavanase Lahazik. Animals don't do that. Oh, if they learn to do that and this animal became the type, then you're responsible as an owner to have it, to do something about it. So again, over there, it's interesting. He makes the Tam Chai Muad Pater. So I mentioned there's a whole Gemara about it from the Psukim. From the Psukim, yeah, we're skipping that detail about the Tam. But we're focusing on the Muad, and you see clearly that he says, the Muad said, V'lo Yishmerenu ba'alav Yirchayu, the Shamer who's that? It's going to be Pater. So even a Shmer Pchusa is sufficient. Our Mishnah matches exactly with Rabbi Yehuda. Now the Gemara is going to say that really our Mishnah could go even according to Rameir. It seems to be a contradiction. Over there, Rameir says you need a Shmir Ma'ula. Here, Rameir says, our Mishnah says clearly you need only a Shmir Pchusa. How's that going to work? So classic, the Gemara is going to say we're talking about different cases. Over there, we're talking about Keren, and over here, we're talking about Shein V'Regel. And Keren and Shein V'Regel have different dinim. So it works. Rameir is our author of our Mishnah. And when it comes to Shein V'Regel, even Rameir holds that Shmir Pchusa is sufficient. That Mishnah that we just quoted of Kasher B'Alav B'Meseira or Nal B'Fnal Rameir says Yatz V'Zik Yechayev, because by Keren he requires Shmir Ma'ula. By Shein V'Regel he doesn't require Shmir Ma'ula because they're different. So now it's compatible. It's more Geshmak that our Mishnah could go according to Rameir. How does that work? Where does he get this from? That Keren and Shein V'Regel should be different. L'chora it was great thinking to assume that here's a Muad, here's a Muad. So there I need Shmir Ma'ula, here is Shmir Ma'ula. They're both Muads. Why should we differentiate? So we're gonna learn right here. Zakti Gemara, Afilu Tema. If you want, I could even tell you Rameir that our Mishnah does go like Rameir. How will that work? Because Shein V'Regel are different. You could add in than Keren. The HaTorah Miyata B'Shmirasam. Because when it comes specifically to Shein V'Regel, the Torah clearly reduces your responsibility of guarding it. And the Torah is the one that teaches us that by Shein V'Regel, Shmir Pchusa is sufficient. And according to Rameir, the Psukim will talk about a Shur Muad. He learns up on those psukim differently than Rabbi Yehuda. If you learn that whole sugya where they argue out the psukim, that you need to have dafka shmir ma'ula. So the answer, here's already the answer, but now we're going to have this long brisa to prove our point. But the answer is right here. The answer is, our Mishnah absolutely could be Rameir. And by Keren, he holds you need to have a shmir ma'ula because the psukim of Asher Muad of Keren require that. And Shein V'Regel, the psukim require only a shmir b'chusa. So that Mishnah is Rameir, this Mishnah is Rameir, and it's no contradiction. The Muad of Shein V'Regel and the Muad of Keren actually have different dinim. One needs a shmir ma'ula, one needs a shmir b'chusa. Because we see clearly that Shein V'Regel only requires shmir b'chusa. We'll see it in the psukim. Where do we see it? So we're going to quote this whole brisa, but this brisa is going to be long. But somewhere in this brisa, we're going to see that Shein V'Regel, the Torah only required a lesser shmira of a shmira b'chusa. So where do we see it in the brisa? The Amr. So I'll just read that again. Afilu teim Rameir. If you want, you could even say our Mishnah does go like Rameir. But how will that work? Shiny Shein V'Regel are different than Keren. The Torah miyatu b'shmira. So when it came to Shein V'Regel, the Torah clearly made you only required that you have a lesser shmira. The Amr Rabbi Lazar, because Rabbi Lazar said. Some people say it wasn't Rabbi Lazar who said it, but b'masnisa tana that we learned it clearly in a brisa that are and there are four things where the Torah reduced your responsibility and let you know that if you do the lesser type of shmira, it's enough. And Shein V'Regel are going to be two of these four, but we're going to have to quote this whole brisa, so we'll learn all four. What are they? Number one is ve'elohim. These are the four. Bar, if you made a pit. Ve'esh, when it comes to your fire. Shein, when it comes to your animal eating up, consuming somebody else's goods, or V'Regel, or if your animal, tramples over somebody else's things. Now we're going to go through each one of these four, where we see in the Torah that it was miyata b'shmirasan. So when it comes to a bar, the pasuk says as follows. The chsiv, it says in the pasuk, v'yiftach ish bar, if you uncover a pit, or if you dig a pit. The pasuk says, v'lo yichasenu, and you're not going to cover it back over, you're going to be responsible. Right there, you see the Torah just give you a major leniency. You may have thought that if you dig a pit, it's your responsibility to fill it back up. What do you mean, just going to cover it? You have these crews, they come in Kingston Avenue, they dig these massive holes, and then at night, they just put these planks over it, they cover it over. Somebody gets damaged, you could have a tie now. You covered it, fill it back up. You still left the pit there. Thank you for covering it, you still have the pit, right? So you would think that if somebody digs a pit, in order for him to be potter, he has to fill the pit back up. Covering it is not enough. It kalita, damage the cover, got uncovered, it broke, right? So, but no, the Torah says clearly that if somebody uncovers a pit, or if they dig a pit, you don't cover it back, then you're going to be chayav, only because you didn't cover it. The implication from the pasuk is, back inside the Gemara, pati, so if you covered it, it's sufficient, and pati, you're going to be pater. So you see by bar, the shmir plus is enough. It's enough to cover the bar, and we don't require you to fill it back up, even though you made this bar. Even though the case that you dug it, you made it, you don't have to fill it in. You could just cover it. So we see by bar that shmir b'chus is enough, meaning a lesser shmira, just covering. By eish, where do we see by eish? The chsiv, it says by eish that shalim yishalim hamavir sabeira, that the person who made the fire, he's going to have to pay. Now these words of shalim yishalim hamavir sabeira, the hamavir beira, those are extra words in the pasuk. Because really the pasuk is talking about you lit a fire, matzah eish, and it burnt your friend's field, whatever, shalom yishalom, you got to pay. What's this shalom yishalom and maver sebeira? So the Torah is teaching us who needs to pay. And hamaver sebeira, the connotation of those words is like the guy who went and lit the fire. It sounds very deliberate, like hamaver sebeira. So the Torah is teaching us that you're only responsible if it was done very deliberately. Either you deliberately lit the fire, or you were so negligent that it's like being deliberate. You left your fire burning. Like, of course the forest is going to come down. So we learn that from the X words of Hamavir Esabeira, which have the connotation of being like very intentional and very deliberate. That you're only responsible in the case when you're extremely negligent, that is considered like a deliberate act. But if you weren't that negligent and you did a little bit of a shmira, you're going to be pater. That's what we learn from the words of Hamavir Esabeira. So by Eish, the Chsiv Shalom, you have to pay Hamavir Esabeira. Ad the Avid Ke'ein Mavir. You're only going to be responsible in a case when it's as if you deliberately went in and lit it, which is when you were extremely negligent. So as long as you put some precaution, you put some signs, stay away from the fire, you put some tape around or whatever, tape, whatever. Whatever you kept some space around your fire, you did something somewhat responsible, you're fine, you're good to go. Shein is number 3 in this brisa, but this is the one that's nagia to us, that we see clearly by Shein that the Torah requires a lesser shmira. Shein, because it says by Shein, the chsiv, it says, Uvir v'sdei acher. that your animal went and it consumed another person's field. So the pasuk over there says that if a person takes an animal and he leads the animal to a sada or to a vineyard, and then the pasuk says, I'm going to read the whole pasuk. It's on the left, pasuk Dalet. So pasuk Dalet, if you go on the left, it's from Shemais Chav Beis Dalet, but it's pasuk Dalet over here into the Torah. So kiyaver ish sada hoy cherem. If a person leads his animal and he takes it to a field or a kerem as a vineyard, v'shilach is be'irai, and he sent his animal into the field, ubir b'stei acher, and the animal then went and ate up the other person's field. Meitav sadeh, meitav karmishal, he has to pay. So from the lashon ubir, which is also similar to Shalom Yishalom and Mavra Sebeira, but the Lashon of Beer is, it sounds like that you caused, like you brought the animal to do, like as almost you fed the animal, like you made the animal do a beer b'stei chaveira. Like you brought the animal to do it, do beer b'stei chaveira. Not that like your animal just went loose and the other fellow got eaten up. It sounds like beer b'stei chaveira, that you made this happen. So here also it's a similar limud that you're only going to be chayav in a way that it looks like that you pasha fed the animal. How's that? If you're extremely negligent, it's almost like a deliberate act. So shein dechsiv ubir b'stei chaveira ad avid ein ubir. And for regel, which is the fourth one in this brisa, which is also negea to us, because our mission is talking about shein v'regel. So that also, because it says dechsiv v'shilach, which v'shilach is a very strong lashon also of sending your animal. Like there's a difference in lashon kodesh if you say vayishlach or vayishalach. Vayishlach means geshik. Vayishalach yoinas. Vayishalach means he sent it away. He didn't just send it out. Not just vayishlach, it's vayishalach. So v'shilach also is a very intentional. It sounds like v'shilach is beer. You made it like you told the animal, please go in there. It sounds very like you're very guilty, very guilty. So it means you have to be so negligent that it's as if you deliberately did this guilty act. V'shilach. I'm sorry, I lost the place. Hold on. Shein dechsiv beer b'stei acher ad David kein beer. Regel dechsiv v'shilach ad David kein v'shilach. Now the Gemara is just going a little parentheses over here. The Gemara is telling us, how do we know that in the pasuk then it says v'shilach is be'irai ubir b'stei acher? How do we know that v'shilach is talking about regel and that ubir means teeth? Neither of those words, the definition of the word on its own, mean that. Shilach means to send, ubir means to consume. So how do we know that shilach means regel and ubir means teeth? We just assumed a second ago that when it said in the pasuk shilach, so you see that it's only chayiv regel if you do kein v'shilach, and if you do beer, it means you only chayiv for shein when you do kein beer. But who said ubir means shein? Who says shilach means regel? So now we're going a little off topic. We're bringing another brisa. So that brisa is what teaches us how to learn that pasuk that v'shilach means regel and that ubir means teeth. How do we know Vitanya? Because we learned in the brisa the shilach that when it says in this pasuk that v'shilach you sent your animal zehar regel, it's referring to regel. The brisa says v'chein oimer, like it says in a pasuk mishalchi regel asher b'chamar, that they sent the feet of the shar b'chamar. So we see that shilach goes on regel. Ubir, when it says in that pasuk that you led the animal to your friend's field and ubir consumed your friend's field, there is zehar shein, it's referring to teeth. This brisa is the one that's teaching it to us. The ubir is shein. The brisa says, we also see in a pasuk that it says, Pasha Yevar Hagalo ad Tumai. Over there, Galo means teeth. Pasha Yevar Hagalo ad Tumai, the way your teeth consume something up entirely. Galo means teeth. So you see that with teeth goes the word Yevaer. Yevaer goes to something that the teeth chew up, that the teeth consume. So time the Avid Ke'en V'shilach Ubir. The reason why the Torah says Yechayev, it's only if you do it in a case of very deliberate or extremely negligent. It looks like v'shilach, like as if you made this happen and you wanted this to happen. You sent the animal's legs to walk over this field, or you sent the animal to go eat up the field. If you didn't do it in such an extreme way, you're not going to be responsible. So from this brisa or this memory from Rabbi Lazar, we see that Abba Dvarim HaTorah Miyata B'Shmir by bar coverings enough. Eish, only if you're extremely negligent, and regel and shein only if you're extremely negligent. That to the extent it looks like you intentionally wanted and deliberately did this, only then you're going to be chayav. So our Mishnah could very well go like Rameir. Because our Mishnah is talking about shein v'regel, shmir b'chus is enough. And Rameir in the other Mishnah was talking about Karen you need to have a shmir mullah.
You wanted to go like Rameir.
Yeah.
But is the rule to say that you go like Shita also?
Not that I know of.
Maybe he'll say that the dead animal equivalent comes
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think of it, I should say, but yeah, maybe Rav Lazar will hold by Karen, you have to kill it, and Shem Regel, he agrees. Yeah, the same answer would work. Yeah, yeah. Right. Exactly.
The Amar Belazar, Kimmer Belazar.
No, that Rabbi Eliezer was a Tan in the Mishnah. This was Rabbi Eliezer and a Moira, but then Amrila, some people say this was a Brisa. But if it's Rabbi Eliezer, it's an Moira. This one, this quote.
But Lustig pointed out that it's a special fetch to say it's your mayor.
Right. Yeah, then the same answer could apply for Rabbi Eliezer. For Rabbi Eliezer. That would be Rabbi Eliezer, this would be Rabbi Eliezer. That one's a Tana, this one's an Amir. Now the Gemara is going to go one step further, and the Shiur is going to end there. Not just our Mishnah could go like Rameir. Actually, if you're going to be medayik in the wording of our Mishnah is screaming it. Our Mishnah very much lends itself to say that we're going specifically like Rameir. Why? Because we started this in Akdama. Up until here, we've been talking about a Shiur. In fact, the name of Perek Dalet, this is Perek Vav. The name of Perek Dalet is Shor Shanagach Dalet Behei. The name of Perek Hey was Shor Shanagach. When it comes to Shein V'Regel, you can talk about any animal in the world that you want. All of a sudden, the Gemara, the Mishnah specifically switches. A kain is saying Ladir, because it's specifically trying to point out to you, to say that I'm talking only about Sain now, and I'm only talking about Shein V'Regel, and the Shein V'Regel is going to be very different than Keren. Zakti Gemara, we're going to do that, and then we're done. Zakti Gemara, Amar Rabba says, Masnisin Namideka. Our Mishnah is also very meduyak. Our Mishnah is very accurate to say that our Mishnah is going to go like Rameir. The Ketani Tzayin, because our Mishnah all of a sudden starts talking about Tzayin. First 5 prakim Sechus Bava Kama never talk about Tzayin. Everything is Shur. No matter what you're talking about, it's always Shur. Mitamal, Tosfos said Tzayin. Mikdi, let's see. B'Shur Kaskin and Va'asi. We've been talking about Shur up until here. Nisni Shur, let it say Shur here too. Ma'ishna the Ketani Tzayin. Why all of a sudden did it change it and want to say Tzayin? Lav mishum da matayra mita b'shmirasan. Isn't it because specifically by tzayin, in other words, specifically by shein v'regel, the Gemara will say lav mishum the kan karen like sivba, because over here when it comes to tzayin, by the way, some people say that word kan is supposed to say tzayin. So either you say kan val da when we're talking about shein v'regel or talking about tzayin, or you actually read the word tzayin. Lav mishum the tzayin karen like sivba. When it comes to tzayin, there is no karen. Shein v'regel udechsivbe. There's only shein v'regel. And that's why the Mishnah specifically changes. We're talking about Shur for the last 5 prakim. It changes into Tzayin, because by Tzayin there is no Karen, there's only Shein V'Regel. And because only by Tzayin, only by Shein V'Regel is it going to be this din that if a Naba Kara, you do a Shmer Pchusa, you're going to be Pater, because Shein V'Regel is different. And that's why the Mishnah did it. But Kamash Malan, the Mishnah is coming to teach us the Shein V'Regel, the Mu'adin Hu, that Shein V'Regel, which are Mu'adin Tchilasai, for them, it's not enough, a Shmir Pchusa, the kindness Tzayin Ladir, that you're going to be patur shma minat gedrungen from our Mishnah that our Mishnah is specifically going according to Meir. That's why the Mishnah changed. Again, for Rabbi Yehuda, you could always want to tie in like that. This Mishnah goes to Rabbi Yehuda. We don't want to do that. And you don't have the deal. Now it's more geschmack that it's not just. It could even go like Rameir. It actually looks like it is Rameir, and that's why we intentionally changed the language. Talking about Shur for 5 prakim, we go Hakones and Ladir to let us know that we're talking about Tzayin, we're talking about Shein V'Regel, that we're not talking about Karen, and that's why, because we're talking about Shein V'Regel, is the din going to be Shmer Pchusa is enough, because by Karen Shmer Pchusa wasn't enough, and that is Rameir's opinion, and that goes very, very well. And we have a minion, so we could have a Meir. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you both.
Yes, let's end with that again.